Chapter 4. You don't define me. I've been labeled as disruptive and a troublemaker by my teachers, but I knew those labels didn't capture who I really was. I wasn't willing to let teachers, or anyone else for that matter, decide who I was. A school friend of mine named Janie Henderson invited me to her house a few times, but I was always busy and unable to accept her offer. One day, though, when she invited me over after school to join her family for dinner, I was finally able to accept. Janie, her brother and sister, and I cranked some country music in the car and had a fun ride to her house where Janie introduced me to her mother. "Hi, Rashad," Janie's mom said, folding me in a big hug. "It's so nice to finally meet you. Janie's told me so much about you." We chatted with Janie's mom in the kitchen for a while, munching on the Rice Krispie treats she'd made for us. She was really nice, and her warmth reminded me of my own mom. Then Janie and her brother and I hung out in the basement and goofed off, watching The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Although I'd never been to Janie's neighborhood before, their home, the home of a white family in a white neighborhood, didn't feel that different from my own home. Around 6 o'clock, her mother called downstairs, "Dad's home, time for dinner." We'd flipped off the TV and climbed the stairs to get ready for dinner. When we got upstairs, Janie's dad was looking at the mail. Glancing my way, he dropped his eyes back toward the letters and catalogs. "Hey, sir," I said with a big smile. "How are you doing?" Mr. Henderson didn't respond. "I'm Rashad," I offered, extending my hand. "It's nice to meet you." No eye contact, no answer. Maybe he just had a bad day. Not exactly sure what that was about, I joined the others in the dining room. "Thank you." "Thank you, Clyde." Mrs. Henderson, who I noticed had changed into nicer clothes for dinner, had set 6 places at the dining room table, and the table looked like it was ready for Thanksgiving. Each porcelain white table setting was framed with silverware and a cloth napkin. The mood suddenly felt heavier than it had when we first arrived home from school. After Mr. Henderson said a prayer for our meal, we began eating the pot roast, carrots, salad, and potatoes in front of us. I was careful to use my best manners and not to inhale my food the way I usually did. The only sounds in the room were the sounds of the silverware. Thinking that the dinnertime silence was a little odd, I reasoned that maybe everyone was just hungry. Speaking in the direction of Janie's dad and brother, I asked, "Been watching any games?" I didn't know anyone who could resist talking football. Yeah, it usually turned into trash talking the other person's team, but it was still fun. Janie's brother mentioned a game that they watched a few weeks back, but no one else chimed in. Feeling the strain of the awkward silence, I exclaimed, "These mashed potatoes are good, Mrs. Henderson." After she thanked me, the room fell silent again. Something was off in that room, but I didn't know what it was. Was it me? Did I have something stuck in my teeth? Did I have a huge booger on my face? Wanting to rule these possibilities, I politely excused myself to use the restroom. Walking through the kitchen, I stepped into the bathroom and checked my appearance in the mirror. Clean teeth, no booger. Then I saw it. Resting on top of the tank on the back of the toilet were 3 decorative letters like you might get at a craft or hobby store. They were displayed the way a college girl might feature her sorority letters. But this wasn't a decorative celebration of Sigma Theta, or Zeta Phi Beta. Sorry. Jalen? Okay. 3 wood block letters read KKK. Though I never encountered anything like this, I knew that the Klan was a hate group that had opposed the civil rights movement and advocated white supremacy and white nationalism. My head was spinning. As I mentally replayed the interactions that I had in Janie's home, they suddenly made more sense. Her father not acknowledging me when I introduced myself, the cool mood in the dining room, the silence at the dinner table. I no longer felt safe or comfortable in Janie's home. My mind raced with questions. How could a home that had felt so much like my own be hiding such an ugly secret? And why on earth would they reveal it by putting it on display? Why hadn't Janie or her mom or siblings warned me? Although I knew my father had faced racism in the military, I'd never encountered anything like this before. What am I going to do? My heart thumped in my chest as I considered my options. Staying and playing along with the charade didn't feel right. I wanted to get out of there. I could have grabbed my backpack and run straight through the garage and out of Janie's neighborhood, but that didn't feel quite right either. Janie's mom and siblings had been really kind, and I didn't want to be rude to them. I finally settled on returning to the table and announcing my departure. Whispering a prayer to God for help, I opened the bathroom door and returned to the table. I didn't want anyone at the table to see how scared I was. If they had spoken to each other while I was in the restroom, everyone felt silent at my return. Rather than leaving immediately, I sat back down and tried once more to get a conversation going. After realizing I was getting nowhere, I simply announced, "Look, guys, I'm sorry. I see how it is, and I don't want to just disrespect y'all's home. I think I'm going to go now." Janie yelped, "What? You can't go, Rashad. Please stay. Just finished dinner." While Janie's dad kept his eyes down, I recognized anguish in the rest of the faces at the dinner table. Undeterred, I announced, "I see where I'm at, and I'm going to excuse myself." I honestly don't know how I held it together. It was like I was on autopilot, and instead of rage, what had bubbled up were all the manners my mom had taught me since I was a young boy. "No, you don't have to go," Janie's mom said politely. "Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Henderson," I said. Then I headed for the kitchen, grabbed my backpack, and swiftly stepped out of the door. It had never felt so good to be outside. I had to get some distance between Janie's house to clear my mind, so I walked about 2 blocks before pausing to dig my flip phone out of my backpack to call Mom. When she picked me up at the entrance to Janie's neighborhood, I didn't mention the reason I'd left so abruptly. I just thanked her for coming to get me and told her I wanted to get home to do homework. Compared to sitting at that table, homework was actually appealing. Back at school. When I was waiting at the bus stop the next morning, chatting with the guys I knew my whole life, most of them white, I pushed away thoughts about what had happened that night before. But when we all piled off the bus and headed into school, I noticed that I was more aware of the environment I always took for granted. The student body at Jefferson Forest, a high school in the rural community outside of Lynchburg, was about 90% white and 10% black, with maybe a couple of Latino kids. This was my world, and it seemed completely normal to me. Back then, when the world wasn't as politically charged as it is today, I'd ride around with my football buddies in trucks that had Confederate flags on them. To us, it just made no difference. Not only had my boys and I grown up in the same neighborhoods and attended the same schools, but we also worked together on the football team, on the football field. As fellow team members, what brought us together was bigger than what divided us. From Pee Wee all the way up to the NFL, football had its own set of rules on and off the field. My friends and I shared a common goal, and that united us. But as I scanned the parking lot, I began to wonder how many other households were like Janie's. Who else's parents believed what her dad believed? Worse yet, were there students at my school who felt the same way? The protective bubble around my childhood was abruptly popped. When I spotted Janie's car in the parking lot, I headed in her direction. I was a little ticked off that she had put me in that position, and although her words and actions proved that she didn't think the way her dad did, I still felt like she had thrown me under the bus. An angry scowl spread over her face, but it wasn't for me. I hate that my dad is like that, she said, sounding sad and frustrated. But if anyone could change his mind, it would be you. And how'd that work out for you? I asked wryly. She hung her head. Rashad, she whispered, I'm so sorry. I forgive you, I said, but to be clear, I ain't ever going back to your house. I was happy to put that night behind me, where it stayed until Janie's father and I would meet again a few years later. You define you. I refuse to let that night or anyone define me, and that's how I've always been. When Pee Wee coaches suggested I played the positions that bulky kids played, I ignored them. When my dad predicted I'd end up like him, I vowed to become someone different. When teachers treated me like I was a clown, I decided to be someone who would be taken seriously. Even as a kid, I had this ever-increasing sense that I mattered to God and that God had called me worthy. To me, that was all that mattered. Although they may have not been as brazen as Janie's dad, there will always be people who will try to define you and keep you in a box. Older siblings might make you feel puny and worthless. Teachers might not view you as someone who's destined for success. Other adults may lack the vision to see the inherent value you bear as a child of God, or they'll fail to recognize the amazing potential that's inside of you. And like me, you may even have a parent, present or absent, who communicates to you that you are insignificant. You might also find yourself on the receiving end of prejudice. Someone may judge you for the things you can't control, like your skin color or the neighborhood where you grew up. Someone may judge you for things important to the core of your identity, like your beliefs or values. These kinds of judgments are the hardest to overcome, and there's no quick fix for dealing with the hurt and frustration that come with the prejudice. You just have to keep reminding yourself that those opinions don't matter. They don't change who you are. I want you to hear that loud and clear, that no one except you and God gets to define you. You have God-given dignity and worth simply because you exist. And it's as you decide to live with that truth, you also get to decide who you will be. You can choose to ignore the opinions of others as you strive to become the man or woman God created you to be. No one else gets to define you. Chapter 5.